Hi, this is Jim Musser with Upstream Ministries, and this is episode 69 on Views from Downstream. And as I mentioned last Wednesday, I am kind of changing direction a little bit. I just want to talk about the church and how we might experience it in a much better way than currently most of us do. And I shared kind of an analogy with my drinking what I consider now bad coffee, Maxwell House, Folgers, just not a very good quality coffee, but I was raised on that and drank that for a couple decades in adulthood before I went to Kenya on a trip and experienced much better coffee. And so from that, I knew the difference between weak coffee or bad coffee, whatever you want to, how you want to describe it, and good coffee. And I still drink occasionally bad coffee because I'm just in a situation where I can't do anything different. But that's not my preference. And I think, as I mentioned last week, that we in the church are so used to church the way it's done right now and it's been done for the last 4 or 5 decades, and we don't know that there's anything better. And most of us would conclude probably it's okay. Some of us probably think it's great, just as some people think that Folgers and Maxwell House is great. But there's just a deeper experience I believe that we can have in the church that the current way we do things does not allow. And, I think about the American church has always been very time conscious. And the joke used to be that we better be out by 11 o'clock or noon so that we can get to whatever restaurant we need to get to beat the crowds. And there's still almost a built-in timer in our worship services. We better not go over this point, whether it be an hour and 15 minutes, but it's a limit. And because over the years, sermons have gotten longer and more focused, worship times have become longer, we have just limited ourselves to anything but the worship and the sermon, because by the time you throw those two together, you pretty much have got your time limit. You consider an offering, perhaps communion, and you've used all the time up. There's no time for anything else. But what we're unable to do now, it seems, is real important. And I want to just talk over the next few weeks about some of the things that I believe are missing in our worship services, particularly, that really would enhance them tremendously. And I was thinking about this the other day about testimonies. You rarely hear a testimony anymore. Occasionally somebody will get up and share something, maybe how they became a believer in Jesus. I know our church occasionally does a video testimony. And I think it's interesting because I think one of the things, and as a pastor with students, I realized that college students, like adults, could get very long-winded and not very focused and rambling in whatever they were sharing. And I think there's a fear of that, so we want to have control of it. But by controlling the testimonies, we're really limiting what I think God wants to do through those. It is the testimony of our own lives and what God is doing that offers encouragement and, in many ways, instruction and direction to other people. And if we never have that, or that's not a part of our community, we're really missing out because we don't know what great things God is doing in people's lives. We don't have that kind of opportunity to share. Now, maybe sometimes in small groups, but the whole church will never hear that. And so I just really want to encourage you as leaders, particularly, to offer up time. If you have to cut back on your sermon, which if you've listened to me, I believe it needs to be cut back by about 15 minutes so that you have time to engage the congregation in other things. And one of those would be testimonies, allowing people to share what God is doing in their lives. Now, I understand if you offer that up this kind of open that it may get out of control, but I think there's ways to manage that where you're just willing to step in like a small group leader, that somebody just goes on and on. One of the skills of being a leader is to be able to step in and shut that down if they've gone on way too long. But I just think it's so exciting to hear what God's doing in people's lives. And it's such an encouragement to people. I believe that often that's what happened in the early church, is people were sharing their experiences of what God was doing in their lives. And if you think about the way the church is set up now, the only person we really hear from on a regular basis is the pastor. Now, the pastor can share what's going on in his or her life and what God's doing, but that's not the same as people in the congregation sharing their own stories. And testimonies often, our mindset is that they are talking about how we became a Christian, how we became a follower of Jesus. But our testimony is a living testimony, and it should be reflected in our everyday lives. And regardless if we're just a brand new Christian or we've been a Christian for 50 years, one should be able to share what's going on currently, what God is doing in your life currently. There's plenty to share. And I know that people aren't used to that, and that's part of the discipleship training. And I think that all these things that I want to talk about really go back to how can we be stronger in our discipleship. And one of the ways is to demonstrate to people they have a testimony to share. There are things that God is doing in their lives that are worth sharing with other people. And by listening to those, other people can learn how to do that because a lot of people don't feel comfortable doing that. So that is one thing that I think would add a lot of depth and just satisfaction, enjoyment to our worship service if we go back to having people share about what God is doing in their lives. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll come back next Wednesday with another aspect of the worship service that I think can be changed and improved upon. And until then, I hope that you'll take what I've said and think about it, meditate on it, seek God in that, particularly if you're a church leader, and see if God might be saying something to you about allowing people to share what God is doing in their lives. Until then, have a great day and a great week.